My name is Isaac Udogu. I am a Nigerian-born digital artist and martial artist. Most of my upbringing has been in the South. I've been in South Carolina for over 20 years now. This is my home. I am Columbia through and through. Growing up here, it felt like home. It always made sense. There's so many similarities between West African and Black Southern American culture. From the food that we eat, the music that we listen to. When I went back to Nigeria back in 2016, people always joke about how the Black church has the longest church service in the South, right? 3 to 4 hours long. And it was a mirror in Nigeria. It was the same. There was so many things going on. It was just, you would think church is over, but the organs will start playing again. The roots that I have in South Carolina, it influences my work a lot. That southernness, that ease. I want people to feel that same thing. South Carolina means a lot to me. I was telling my girlfriend how bad I wanted to have more local shows. I want to have more local presence. I see what's happening on the internet and digital space, but I want people to know that I'm from Columbia, South Carolina.
Welcome to Binder. I'm Ray McManus. All right. Well, we are here with a regular, Jackie Adams, Director of Art and Learning here at the Columbia Museum of Art. You're here with me about as much as Drew. But today we're going to talk about 22 South Carolinians, a new exhibit here at the Columbia Museum of Art. So Jackie is going to talk a little bit about what went into this and how this came to be. And we're going to have some fun. So it's good to have you here, Jackie.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. It's my pleasure. And it's funny because the first time we had our first podcast, I was talking about hindsight 2020. So I'm on like this numerology kick here. I don't know what's happening, but the 2 thing keeps coming up and it will reveal its magic sometime down the road. But yeah, 22 South Carolinians. I think I was on another podcast. I know I was talking about 30 Americans and you know, the significance of the 30 and the Americans and the title and everything. We had some fun conversation there. So 22 South Carolinians is basically an extension of that show. So when we scheduled 30 Americans a couple of years ago, I knew instantly right then and there that I wanted to do a South Carolina based version of that. I just didn't know, how it was going to look.
You know, we're real big into stories here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the stories that art tells, the story the museum tells. What is the story that 22 South Carolinians tells?
I think there are a couple here. Community, obviously, is a big one. You have artists like Ernest Lee, a.k.a. Chicken Man, who has been a figure in Columbia and the Midlands for a long time. But if you look at him and his practice and what he's done, community is so central to that. I mean, you could go into many homes and see his work, and it's a point of conversation that leads to another point of community because that's how you can get to know someone. So community is a big one. I would say identity is another huge idea in this exhibition. The identity of Blackness and Black imagination. This is a collective of Black artists, and I think that they're exploring identities of Blackness from a spiritual perspective, from a historical perspective, from a cultural perspective that are very important to think about. So I think when you marry those two together, identity does become a much bigger sort of overarching theme. I don't know every artist in the state. I know a great handful, but I'm always curious to find out more. And the way that you do that is by just getting to know people and seeing what their networks are and who they're connected to. So our museum affinity group called the Friends of African American Arts and Culture, they are very well connected with Black arts and culture in the state and throughout the country. So I wanted a collaborator for the show, and I asked them, I said, can we partner up and make sure we get a good representation of different Black artists in the state? And we went from there on the planning.
That's cool. When you started the collaboration, I mean, how did you select these particular artists? What maybe went behind some of that selection process?
Yeah. 22 is not a finite number that we came up with. It was one that was sort of naturally came about towards the end of the planning process. The Friends of African American Arts and Culture and myself got together, and we really just started putting down on paper all of the different visual artists that we knew of. And we talked a little bit about who they were. Like if I didn't know someone, I would ask questions and vice versa. We just got to know who these individuals were for a little bit. We did send out, maybe about 35 invitations to different artists. You send the invitations out, you wait, you check in, and then you really find out who can confirm and who can do the show. And a lot of that's based on a couple of different decisions. Like sometimes artists can be in the show because they are just so excited. Sometimes they can't be in the show because they're just not available or they're booked for those dates. We ended up with 22 confirmed artists who accepted our invitations and said we'd be delighted and excited to be a part of the show.
It's always fascinating to me how you come up with the group, as one who has edited collections of poetry or, anthologies. For me, it's organic, the way you just described. Like you identify, you find folks to help you to identify so that it's not just a singular activity. And then you reach out to as many as you can and you hope to get some return back. Now, are they throughout the state?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking that question because I can definitely expand on that a little bit. I think that's important. When we wanted to come up with a group, who's represented and how all that comes together is really important. You don't want a homogenous group, for example. That's no fun. You're looking for some diversity, variety, and ultimately good representation. So we did make final selections based on, we wanted a good mix of gender representation, male versus female, they, them, folks who use non-binary pronouns. So we wanted to see a good representation in those categories, and I think we did really well there. It was important for me to see younger generations, mid-career and established artists, because the state does offer that huge swath of variety. That was important to see, and also a diversity of mediums and processes. You're going to see a range of anything from the figure to the abstract to everything in between. So that's nice to show the variety. Most of them are based in the Midlands, I would say, with really great reaches into parts of South Carolina. So they may have like familial roots in different places of South Carolina. Like we just interviewed Renee, who you'll hear from in just a moment. A lot of her work is based on looking at her ancestral roots, which go back through Florence. I mean, just fascinating stuff. But she was also, in the Mid-Atlantic area and the Louisiana area. And there's displacement issues that she went through that sort of connect back to her African ancestral roots of enslavement.
My mother is from South Carolina, and our roots go back to the 1700s. And that's how I ended up coming back to South Carolina. My mother went to school at Xavier after she graduated and met my father. And that's how I was born in New Orleans. But every year for many decades, we'd come to visit grandparents and aunts and uncles and great-grandparents. I also went to Xavier University and I graduated and was there for a while. And they had Hurricane Katrina. And we bopped around the country, and I decided South Carolina would be probably the closest form of home for me because of all the fond memories. And my grandmother at the time was still living. She was in her 90s. And I thought this is a great time to bring my kids to have that same interaction with older relatives and hear all those wonderful stories. My grandmother talking about when she was in New York and Harlem during, the Harlem Renaissance. And how she saw Billy Eckstine, and to have those stories and them to have that personal connection. Because, you read them in the book, but then you have someone in your family who actually experienced that. Wonderful. And also we had a very strong history here, an oral tradition that was always passed down, not only from my grandparents, but my great-grandparents. And I said, well, you know what? I want my kids to have that experience. Yeah. And so I decided to come back and start digging around family history. And that's kind of how this whole concept of doing work that was like a visual history of my family's oral tradition came about.
I'm hearing a few key things in what you just said, and the idea of being displaced that's where I kind of want to dig into your work a little bit.
Okay.
Your piece in the show is a mixed media installation piece, and it has a lot of wonderful artifacts and objects. And when you put it together, every single object means something. But I wanted you to tell our audience and our listeners a little bit about this really special, unique piece in 22 South Carolinians. It comes with just real history. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes. So my great-grandmother, she lived in Marion, South Carolina, which is right outside of Florence, in between Conway, close to Myrtle Beach. And that was one of the places that we would spend a lot of time on the porch listening to these stories. And one was about her great-grandmother, which would have been my fourth great, my great-great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-great-great-grandfather, Robert and Judith. And Judith was a midwife, not only for the children that were slaves in the area, but she would help the doctors with all of the white children giving birth. And so she was highly revered. And when Mr. Davis, and that was the plantation, they were on the Davis plantation, he decided to give her, along with her children, to the Flagler plantation because his daughter married a Flagler. And so this woman was given my fourth great grandmother as a wedding present. And I used to, as a little kid, like, that's interesting how you become a gift.
Yes.
And, learning more as you get older about that history. What was amazing is that Robert, her husband, the father of her kids, he wasn't allowed to go to the plantation. So he had to visit one day a week if he could or felt like it. And what was the dangers of, walking the streets of America past the plantation gates, which are, usually iron or wood and beautiful and have wonderful landscaping, but his decision to go back and forth to see his wife and kids.
Can you describe a little bit for the viewers who are starting to paint a picture of this story, what that piece looks like when you're standing in front of it and some of the parts and pieces that pull it together? It's very fascinating.
Okay, so the main painting is reverse glass. Most of the paintings, that and part of the gate, which was an old British window from a school. And I actually have two windows. I thought that was really important because you have all these little crests. And for me, it was about connecting all of the culture that started America, because you're talking about 1700s, 1600s. It's the beginning. So we have the American flag. And because the structure of the economy had to deal with them bringing Africans here, I wanted to paint a picture of the regal part of them, losing a little bit of the African, and that's how we get into African Americans. So you see bits and pieces of the fabric that creates the flag out of African patterns, and then it goes into red, white, and blue as a connection. And it's connected to an antique birthing chair. And because she was helping deliver babies, I thought the antique birthing chair was amazing because it talked about the birth of America, but also bringing life into the world. So that was important to me. And you'll see little pieces of the American flag in her dress. And she's the only one that has a lot going on, like her hair. Instead of having her hair wrapped in a rag or like a hat that the slaves had to wear out in the fields, I wanted her to be more like from where she came from. And not knowing exactly where she was from, her hair is like from a tribe in Zaire. She's got, scarification from like Nigeria. She has a kente cloth Nigerian and different African patterns. And then you see pieces of that in the flag, but also pieces of that in some of the other people that represent the children coming from her into the world. Let's see what else is in it. So that Madonna and Child, she has the baby, and the baby is the umbilical cord. And you see a little patchwork, just a little patchwork. And I don't know if you notice, it looks like blood from the umbilical cord, but in that you see a piece of Robert's cape, because he has the red cape, which kind of deals with Little Red Riding Hood. That's the title. The title focuses on him, but it's really more about her having a piece of him, even though she left. And then as you go through, things that are still important to South Carolina are those bottles, all the blue bottles that are everywhere. They call them haint bottles or haint trees. for me, I had to learn more about the bottles. I said, well, where did this come from? You know, you see people with the modern day bottles, they have the metal trees with the bottles, all different colors, or you see the blue bottles. And as I did more research, I found out that the bottles come from the Congo, which the Congolese brought a lot into South Carolina. And it translated through the South, because you can go into rural South areas in Louisiana, Mississippi, and see blue bottles, and people don't really understand what they were. But they come from these altars that they did out of glass mushrooms. I think it was called the Congo Pun. And it was a place where they would not just pray, but it was more like upliftment to the ancestors. You know, it was something really positive. And so the slaves brought that through here. Also, the blue, the light blue that people paint under the porches and stuff, that also has to do with the haints or keeping the ghost out. And, you know, people in Louisiana would say, oh, that keeps the pigeons away. So you see how through oral tradition things change, or maybe they don't remember exactly.
I know. You know, all you have to do is take a drive down to the beaches of South Carolina, and as you go through some of those rural areas, you'll see the painted blue homes. You'll see the bottles. Still very much practiced today.
Very much practiced. I thought that it was important to have that because we enjoy it as a creative craft now. The history of knowing where it's from was very important. And it's interesting that my father's side is from like Mississippi, Memphis, Louisiana, and the Congolese brought the jazz form. That's where we have Congo Square. All the jazz riffs from the drumming from the Congo is an American music art form. And I said, that's interesting. On my dad's side, we got the jazz coming from the Congolese. And then on my mother's side, who's from South Carolina, we have the bottle trees.
When you talk about your great-great-great-great-grandfather and having to walk those streets, and when you're with that piece, you feel connected to those gates. Like, you are walking across those gates. And when you see them, they're guarded by these two foxes, which are so interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
I love the foxes. Okay, so the title of the piece is The Red Robin Hood of Ogun and the Gatekeepers. So these foxes were actually in front of a plantation. And I thought it was so interesting because one's a guy and one's a girl. They're very whimsical. They're dressed, you know, very elegantly in their little foxtrot outfits. But more importantly, I said, oh my God, this is going to complete the story, because the boy fox represents Mr. Davis and the girl fox would represent Anna Davis. And for those who know the plantation, when you come to a plantation, the first thing you see is usually the plantation in the back, all the beautiful landscaping, and these iron gates. And most people never got to leave those gates. So to leave the gates, you would have to have permission, right? And so the name of the foxes were called Gatekeepers. It was so interesting when I saw those foxes. It kind of completed the whole undertaking.
It really is wonderful. There's just so much to kind of get into and unwrap and think about. It just heightens your sense of curiosity the more and more you explore the piece. And the reverse glass painting is something that everybody is so intrigued with. I think it might be new for a lot of people when they see it. People are so curious about how you paint reverse. Can you talk a little bit about your reverse glass painting technique?
Yes. So I used to see in some of the antique stores old pieces, very rare every blue moon, and usually it's from China. But it comes, the word églamager, which means reverse glass painting, was very popular in France. So it's about 500-year-old technique. But because it's technically difficult to do, a lot of artists don't like it. And what I usually tell artists, the best way to explain it, when you learn how to paint a canvas, everything you put last on the canvas goes first on the glass, including your signature. The drawing is in the front and you start painting and doing the detail. And after a while, you're constantly covering it up. So you have to wait for it to dry and you have to turn it around on the front side where the paint is not accessible and steady it that side in order to turn it back around.
Gotcha.
It's a little crazy.
It's a fascinating process, and printmakers are very familiar with working in the reverse.
Yes, silk screening is kind of like that. You can mess up a silk screen if you don't do the color line up correct.
Exactly. And it does. It takes a little bit of training your brain to think differently, because your logical side of your brain wants to go in a certain way. It's tricky for people.
It's tricky. People ask me all the time, are you dyslexic? I said, no, I don't think so. And the funniest thing is my mother, who lived in Memphis for a while before she moved to New Orleans. So after Hurricane Katrina, she moved the year before the hurricane. And then we moved to DC. And I was so full of like, I've got to paint, because I went through something traumatic. The creativity was just coming. So I was grabbing glass, grabbing doors, grabbing things to paint. And so I was in my sister's kitchen. My mother comes in. Now, she always come and visit and see the finished product. She never had a concept of what I was doing. So she comes in and she's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing the reverse glass. And she sees all this like paint and mush and just the colors. She said, well, are you doing abstract now? Like what is that? I said, no, Mom, this is the same thing I've been doing like for 16, 17 years. And she's like, really? And I turned the painting over and she flips out. She's like, oh my God.
It's kind of like magic.
She's like, what happened? This is what you've been doing? I feel so embarrassed.
Thanks to Jackie for that wonderful interview. You can see more of J. Renee's work on her Instagram page at jreneeartweb and right here in the museum as part of 22 South Carolinians, on view through May 22nd. Coming up,
the art that's coming out of South Carolina, this idea that somehow it's not as good as other places. And I'm like, you are crazy, people.
Yeah. See Scott Fitz after this quick break.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here to fill up your social calendar for September with some exciting CMA programming. On September 8th and the 14th, take a tour and get a new perspective on Amanda McCover's Bright Little Day Stars with volunteer coordinator and installation assistant Jackie Palmieri. On September 22nd, grab a cocktail and a seat for a panel discussion featuring Carol Souvion, executive producer and director of the Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated PBS series, Craft in America. On September 25th, get your dancing shoes ready for Shea Alexander Presents Live on Boyd Plaza with popular Charlotte-based outfit Reggie Graves and Jazz Theory. You can find out more about these and all of our upcoming programs and events on our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
This one is titled The Unexpected Plush, and this is for RF. Quietly combine one frigid January late early night morning. Dance. Gradually add one tuxedo sans bow tie. Cufflinks. One pair of black seamed stockings. Pearl earrings. Slowly stir. Savor with absolute pure delight. My name is C. Scott Fitz, and I am Artist Development Director for the South Carolina Arts Commission. I am an artist, a chef, and a poet.
So, see, you wear many hats, which naturally I'm drawn to you because I too wear many hats, and I have the utmost respect for folks who can do what we do in a day job, but also devote so much of our time and energy to our creative spirits and artistic awareness and our technique and all the things that make us human. But before we get into that, maybe talk a little bit about what you do at the Arts Commission. What exactly do you do in your role?
Well, as Artist Development Director, I focus on individual artist support and sustainability through new programs, new initiatives, grants, fellowships, and other opportunities. I'll also say that This position did not exist prior to my arrival in August of 2019. So one of the things that I love about working for the Arts Commission is being able to come into this job and shape it and make it my own.
Which would also give you a wonderful intersection where your creativity gets to sort of drive how you want to do those things.
Yes.
That's super cool. So you've been in South Carolina since 2019?
I moved here in August of 2019.
Picked a great time to move to South Carolina, didn't you?
I loved it. It was so hot. And I love the heat. People would say, do you know that Columbia is the hottest city in South Carolina? Yeah. And I would say yes, with a smile.
Besides the heat, what about South Carolina do you feel like is a draw here?
The people. I have met some of the best people here in a really short period of time.
Yeah.
There's so many artists I could just name that I have met in the last 2 years that are some of the best artists I have ever met in my 20 plus career. Mm-hmm. And the only thing is that they live in the South, or they live in South Carolina. I could take any of these artists and put them West Coast, up north, anywhere, and these same artists would be celebrated in ways that they are not celebrated here. So part of my goal with the commission is to celebrate these artists and figure out ways how these artists can be recognized for the talent that they are.
I feel like sometimes it is a South Carolina bias that, it's like, artists in South Carolina, how can that be genuine or how can that be real? And I'm like, that's probably the most real art I've encountered. And you find that around the South, honestly. Somebody asked me one time, I was, I don't know, out west somewhere doing a reading, and I had kind of talked about that, and they were like, why? And I'm like, well, if you think about what translates into good art, misery.
But misery. I mean, we have to get past the misery.
Well, yeah, we got to get past it. Yeah.
I mean, or it has to be, for me anyway, it has to be more than just misery, because for so many years, most of the art that I created, site-specific installations and, larger pieces, all dealt with some sort of problem or trouble or issue. And I finally got to the point where I just needed some peace for myself. And I felt like what I wanted to do was to create some pieces of artwork that celebrated joy and beauty, and just to remind people of the beauty in the world every day that we don't pay attention to. I just got to the point where I thought, I'm tired of y'all now. I'm tired. I need, can I have some peace, please?
Yeah.
Can I have something that makes me smile or happy, or just kind of take a breath and close my eyes and just relax and kind of sink into this feeling of beauty. And I was happy gluing things. Something that is really not really exciting to glue.
I don't know.
Well, no, I don't think so.
I like gluing.
Okay. But painting, and seeing the colors kind of come alive.
Yeah.
Next to each other, on top of each other, shining through. I have 2 pieces in the exhibition. One is a portrait of my daughter, Zakiya, and the other one is just a portrait of a person. With both of those pieces, really big departure for me in terms of the type of work that I'm, starting to do. I'm going back to portraiture, which is how I was trained in really, really super formal oil painting, sit for me portraiture, which sounds really impressive to people that don't do that. But it wasn't really exciting for me. And as I grew up and went through college and then got out of college, I started to go into a different direction in terms of wanting to do more mixed media pieces and eventually large scale pieces. But this, I've kind of taken a different turn. They're more intimate and there are a lot of layers to these pieces. So I have incorporated technology as well as just traditional paint to paper or canvas. Those two pieces feel very ethereal to me. Mm-hmm. The one that is titled Dahlia Dreams has a poem, or, actually it's 3 different little poems that kind of go with that in place of an artist statement. But all of them have come from me being in a dreamlike state. And then writing, me writing about my daughter, memories of my daughter, thinking about her as she has grown into this incredible young woman, memories of my grandmother and how much I see in my daughter, that reminds me of my maternal grandmother.
You also write. You're a poet.
Yes.
Like that apprehension.
I have been writing for so long that I never really thought about putting a label on it. And recently, as people have been referring to me as a poet, I've started to go back, like way, way back. I've started to look through journals and I thought, wow, this has been going on for years. And it was just something that I did in addition to the installations or the drawings or the paintings. And really, it was the jumping off point for me talking about my artwork. I was never one of these artists that would stand at a podium and just go through slides and say, this, in this year I did this and this and this and this.
Right.
It always was a performance where I could engage the audience and also get into my head a little bit about some of the things that have been rolling around in there.
I think that's a good segue. You brought a couple pieces.
I did.
Cool. Would you care to read them?
Yes, I would love to. Let's see. Okay, this one is called Bedtime Story. Let me tell you a bedtime story. I dreamed of your reflection, ivory webbed with cinnamon, scorched by 52 kisses, drenched in desire, eyes folded over sapphires, imagining the swayed gaze of temptation, weeping, removing your mouth, whispering through a twisted veil, come to me, laced with thorns, bound, echoing the size of fingertips, measuring the steel distance between force and surrender.
C. Scott Fitz is a chef, curator, artist, and so much more. She was previously the creative director of the McCall Center for Art and Innovation in Charlotte, North Carolina. But luckily for us, she's migrated down south and is at the South Carolina Arts Commission. It's hard sometimes to come to the right emotion to express how I feel about the state that I was born in, that I live in, that I will most likely die in, probably on an interstate. Because so much of my life I've hated this place, not realizing that it wasn't so much the place that I hated, it was the fact that I could not communicate with it. I felt like I didn't have a relationship with it. It was poetry that brought me back to understanding how complex our relationship is to place. The same as our relationships are with our families. There are aspects of it that we might not like, or there might be aspects of it that are downright embarrassing, but it's ours. I think the defining moment for me that made me realize that, no, I do, in fact, love this place, I don't hate it, was at a reading that I had in Indiana. And I was listening to some people talking, and I guess they thought it would be fun to make fun of South Carolina in front of me. And I found myself, for the first time, being offended. Those are jokes I get to tell. I'm from here. But to hear somebody else say things about a state that, you know, my family has lived in and worked in and bled in, and I have worked in and lived in and bled in, and have had to wrestle with my own personal history and even wrestle with how do we reconcile with the troubling histories of this state. I feel like I have grown because of this state. And so if somebody else wants to say something about it, fight me. You've been listening to Binder, a production of Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about Binder, CMA exhibitions, and programs, please visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here. Remember Isaac from the top of our show? He and I recorded a whole interview, and I'll be releasing it as a special bonus episode later this month. So keep your ears on our feed, and we'll see you in February with a special surprise.